and killed 16 military servicemen and women. The shootings were classified simply as workplace violence. USA Today of April 3rd, 2014 explains that the victims at Fort Hood were unarmed. They were gunned down like victims of all other mass shootings. This was not workplace violence. It was domestic terror. The New York Times of April 8, 2014 explains that because the shootings were misclassified as workplace violence, the victims were denied medical services and compensation that would have otherwise helped them to recover. And furthermore, this misclassification has created a national rhetorical crisis. Because we don't use the phrase domestic terrorism, both when and where it applies, we have failed to address the increase in domestic terror and to adequately protect victims and families when tragedies do strike. We must stop misclassifying mass shootings as simple acts of violence and call them what they are: acts of terror. Today we'll explore the causes and problems associated with misclassifying domestic terror and reveal critical solutions. As the Military Times of August 10th, 2014 explains, misclassification makes us turn a blind eye towards domestic terror. If we can't even acknowledge what it is, how are we supposed to stop it? The FBI defines domestic terrorism as any act of mass destruction that attempts to coerce a civilian population or government within its own borders. According to the Free Patriot on September 18th, 2014, despite this definition, the victims of the Boston Marathon bombing were denied medical services and insurance because the bombing wasn't classified as domestic terror. There are two problems. Victims suffer, and counterterrorism efforts fail. First, misclassification steals necessary funding away from families in need. The Investor's Business Daily on April 15th, 2014 explains, had the Fort Hood shootings been properly classified as domestic terrorism, Sean Manning would have his medical bills, prescriptions, ongoing rehabilitation services, and all related medical bills covered. But instead, he has to fight with his own insurance company just to cover minor surgeries, which Manning has estimated to cost him $70,000 out of his own pocket. The RAND organization analyzed the September 11th attacks of 2001 to determine how much each victim received. On average, the report found that insurance companies gave each victim $3 million to recover, both physically and mentally. But while it is great that the 9/11 victims were compensated, it is equally as tragic that Sean Manning and many more like him in his exact situation are not. When innocent Americans are gunned down in movie theaters, schools, military bases, or even in malls, they should not go bankrupt as a consequence. Second, misclassification undermines our efforts to combat terror within our own borders. Women's E-News on July 17th, 2014 explains, when we fail to use the phrase domestic terrorism, we make domestic terrorism less of a priority. And this has alarming consequences when it comes to dedicating resources towards fighting it. Although we spend $17 billion annually on counterterror, the budget to fight domestic terror is practically non-existent. And many sources, including NPR on January 1st of 2015, find a casual link between our lack of funding to fight domestic terror with the continued rise of domestic attacks, which currently stands at 15 mass tragedies every single year. We Nebraskans are not immune either. On December 5th, 2007, 8 innocent Americans were killed while shopping at Von Maur and Westroads Mall in Omaha, Nebraska. The victims had to hold fundraisers to pay for their funerals of the victims because they didn't qualify for the insurance benefits that they so rightfully deserved. There are two causes: the very fear of terrorism and frugal insurance policies. First, the government is afraid to recognize domestic terror. The Washington Institute on October 13th, 2014 explains, our government fails to counter domestic terror because they have difficulty admitting that terrorists can be homegrown and harm fellow citizens under its watch. And furthermore, all of us citizens accept our government's negligence because we don't want to admit it either. We try to paint a picture of what we think a terrorist should look like and make ourselves comfortable with the idea that terror is too rare to happen to us. But we refuse to acknowledge the fact that terror does not wear one uniform. And that picture that we're trying to paint doesn't exist in the first place. Second, as the government misclassifies domestic terrorism, insurance companies abuse the misclassification to avoid paying benefits. They are reluctant to agree with a misclassification as being a domestic tragedy because that would mean instead of paying just one or two lump sums, they would have to pay that victim's medical bills over their entire lifetime. But the Independent Journal Review on September 19, 2014 explains that insurance companies are able to get away with this and exploit our weaknesses by manipulating the Terrorism Risk Insurance Act. This act was passed following the 9/11 attacks. It was designed to provide victims with enough funding to adequately recover from terror. But the problem with the act is it stipulates that the act of terror must be connected with a federally recognized terror organization, such as Al-Qaeda or the Taliban. And so even though marathon runners in Boston were in fact victims of terror, they were denied medical services and even compensation because of misused and abused technicalities. The shooting at the Sikh temple in Wisconsin that killed 6 people was connected with a hate group of white supremacists and was classified as domestic terror. But although these families were finally helped, this correct classification is much too rare in our own country. It is time that we renew our focus and implement legislative, philanthropic, and rhetorical solutions. First, on a legislative level, we must prompt our officials to amend the Terrorism Risk Insurance Act to make it more consistent with the definition of domestic terror. Recall that this definition of domestic terror is any act of mass destruction that attempts to coerce a civilian population or government within its own borders. It's time that we update our legislation to protect our society. And right now is the perfect time. According to the National Council on Compensation Insurance on January 15, 2015, the Financial Services Committee in Congress just reauthorized the act 1 month ago, and they are still looking for loopholes. It is our duty to reach out to them on their website, financialservices.house.gov, and make them aware of the most detrimental loophole to our society. That homegrown terrorists are not always connected with international terror organizations. And sometimes domestic terror can be from the very people around us. Only then can we effectively allocate funds from the international budget to fight terror to the budget to fight it here at home. Second, on a philanthropic level, we must support organizations that both help victims and fight domestic terror. The Amputee Coalition is such organization that helps raise money, promote awareness about misclassifications, and help provide therapeutic services for disabilities of survivors. Visit amputee-coalition.org to help those in need. Those in Fort Hood, Aurora, and even Omaha, Nebraska depend on your help. Third and finally, on a rhetorical level, we must change the way by which we talk about domestic terror. If we continue to dehumanize instances of domestic terror and treat it as a foreign issue, we are the ones allowing the problem to grow. But if we can humanize instances of domestic terror and understand that terror does not wear just one uniform, then we can take the action necessary to stopping it in the first place. Remembering fallen victims is a step in the right direction. But our solution is to catch them before they hit the ground. Sean Manning served his country and nearly died. Twice. The last thing on his mind should be worrying about paying for his medical expenses as a result of his service to our country. Today we examine the problems, causes, and solutions towards correcting misclassifications of domestic terrorism. The biggest problem is admitting that it is a problem. Terrorism does not just grow from overseas. And it is high time that we take action to protect ourselves, every last one of us, so that we can finally declare to the rest of the world that the United States will not falter in the face of terror.
this evening, please welcome Aaron Sheehan.
The Americans aren't going to be here forever. Taliban militants warned Faizi, a 27-year-old Afghani who had been employed by the U.S. military. Now we know your face. These militants explained as they vowed to find him the moment the Americans pulled out of Afghanistan. Faizi had been told by the U.S. military not to worry, because as a thank you for his service to the United States, both he and his family would be granted safe passage. But this hasn't happened. The Huffington Post on June 23rd of 2014 explains that Faizi is only one of tens of thousands of individuals employed by our military. They're oftentimes the key to success in the region. But they have been left behind by a government that vowed to protect them. The Special Immigrants Visa, or SIV, was created to give safe passage to these individuals. But the system is currently not working. In fact, according to the Council on Foreign Relations, on October 23rd of 2014, 1,600 Iraqis and 6,000 Afghan individuals are still waiting on their promised visas. The SIV system is broken to those who were essential to our success in the region, and it must be adapted. Today, by examining problems, causes, and some solutions to this current SIV failure, we can better understand how to fix it and help those who the aforementioned Huffington Post article asserts face the daily reality, the life and fear of attack. Noor Ahmad Nouri, a 27-year-old Afghani, was found stabbed to death and left on the roadside. The New York Times on March 19th of 2014 credited this attack to the Taliban, angry about his service to the United States. He tried to get a visa, but was unable to do so, resulting in his death. Problems associated with this visa system are two. Visas are too difficult to apply for and are leaving U.S. hired workers at risk. First, the Special Immigrants Visa is simply too difficult to apply for. Vox, on July 8th of 2014, explains that applying for a visa is a 14-step process involving proof of nationality, a letter of recommendation, and a medical examination. These steps are oftentimes not feasible for individuals with little access to public records and medicine. Not only this, but an interview is required. Human Rights First in September of 2014 explained in Iraq, the U.S. has yet to set up the infrastructure to allow these interviews to take place. And in Afghanistan, the embassy is currently not accepting interviews, making completing an essential step to the application nearly impossible for applicants. As a result of this, the State Department in October of 2014 estimated that of the 2,267 individuals who began an application, over half of them weren't even able to finish it because of requirements that made it too difficult. Second, and as a result of this, U.S. hired workers are being put at risk. The Iraqi Refugee Assistance Program estimated in September of 2014 that one Afghan individual is killed every 36 hours because of their affiliation with the United States. We have failed to protect those who helped us the most through a visa system that simply doesn't work. Now they're paying the ultimate price. Muhammad, age 27, helped the Marines during his time in Afghanistan, providing critical communication between the Marines and Afghan nationals. NBC on November 23rd of 2014 explains that in 2009, he was placed on a list of backlogged applicants and is still waiting on the delivery of his visa, living every day in fear of attack. causes of this broken system are two: fear of welcoming terrorists into the nation and government bureaucracy. First, there is a fear of welcoming terrorists into the nation. Katie Reisner, policy director at Refugee Rights, explained that cases at the State Department are looked at on a one-by-one basis. And naturally, no one wants to be the individual responsible for letting a terrorist into the nation. But these individuals risked their lives to help us because they thought the mission of the United States was important. They had to go through testing and background checks to get hired in the first place. It's highly unlikely that any of the applicants are terrorists. But despite this, officials at the State Department are hesitant to move forward with granting visas, allowing the backlog to grow tremendously. This borderline racist attitude ignores their valuable service and the contractual guarantee we gave them. Second, even worse is government bureaucracy. Aforementioned Reisner describes the State Department as a mess of uncoordinated bureaucracy. Even when an individual makes it through the application process, they're placed on a backlog list where they must wait to receive their visas. The aforementioned State Department report explained that the average wait time for a visa was 239 days. Far too long for an individual living every day in fear of attack. But despite this, officials at the State Department have shown no real urgency in fixing these problems. The special immigrant's visa is too difficult to apply for, takes too long to be delivered, and is leaving invaluable individuals in the face of danger. But despite this, the founder of the LIST Project, an organization dedicated to helping these people, explained in September of 2014 that there is zero leadership in the White House on this issue. There are thousands of cases languishing in a broken bureaucracy. And our nation's only response is, at least some have been helped. Adrian Kinsella, a U.S. Marine vet, pressured his senators to deliver a visa to his translator, Muhammad. In January of 2013, Muhammad landed in the United States. But it shouldn't take this much political pressure to deliver a visa. So finally, let's examine solutions on both a governmental and personal level. First, on a governmental level, the State Department must fix the problems associated with this visa. The special immigrant's visa serves no practical purpose if it's only going to fail. Deutsche Welle, a leading German newspaper, on July 8th of 2014, explained the State Department can best do this by understanding the difficulties associated with applying, lessening the requirements for applicants, allowing them to communicate through email rather than unreliable postal operations, setting up the infrastructure to allow for interviews. By doing this, the State Department could push the program forward and finally begin granting visas. And second, on a personal level, we all have the ability to make a difference in the life of an interpreter. Petitions on websites such as change.org have already proven effective. Take, for instance, the case of Janice, who interpreted for U.S. Army vet Matt Zeller. On the change.org petition that Zeller created, he credited Janice with saving his life. But after Zeller left Afghanistan, Janice was left alone, living every day in fear of attack. After waiting nearly 2 years for a visa to be delivered, Zeller decided to take matters into his own hands, creating a change.org petition that pressured senators to deliver the visa. And in January of 2013, he received his visa and has since landed in the United States. Zeller has since created a second petition to help a different interpreter, Hassan. I have created a Facebook page, which will be posting links to this petition as well as others. By taking this card, you can receive a link to the Facebook page, where you can like it to receive updates. Donations to the website No One Left Behind are also essential. This website seeks to change policy on a federal, state, and local level to ensure that visas are being granted and individuals are cared for when they land in the United States. By taking these steps, we can all make a difference in the life of an interpreter. And finally begin helping the vital interpreters who've been left behind. There is hope for change, to truly provide justice to those who were essential to our success in the region. By examining problems, causes, and some solutions to this current SIV failure, we better understood how to fix it. And and help those who cannot remain in their home nations. To quote Ali Salah, 37-year-old Iraqi still waiting on his visa. I can't live here. That's for sure. The U.S. doesn't have an answer for Salah and all of his counterparts. It's high time we find an answer.
There for you guys.
Thank you, speakers. We're going to let the judges finish their ballots, and so you guys can relax here, and we're going to excuse the judges out to the outer waiting area. So relax a little bit.